The dawn was of violence. It scraped red streaks across the lip of Oriole Mesa, spilling a light so harsh it felt like a judgment. The wind that came before it carried no relief, only the grit of 1,000 dry miles. It smelled of old horse sweat, the bitter dust of yucca, and the sterile heat of sun-baked iron. This was Mesquite Crossing, a place that existed only because it was too far from everywhere else. Rowan Calder stood by the watering trough, his shadow stretching long and bony in the new light. He was a tall man, built of angles and leached of color, all save for his eyes. They were the color of cold slate, and they missed nothing. He watched the Crow Vale transport wagon grind to a halt, its wheels screaming for grease. The wagon was not hauling freight. It was a cage on wheels, black iron bars stark against the rising sun. Dust settled, clinging to Rowan's worn duster. The two drivers up top were slack-jawed with exhaustion, but the man who stepped down from the rear was fresh. He was a broad man with a sweaty face and a shotgun cradled in his arm. A warden. Rowan's gaze shifted from the warden to the cargo. Inside the iron cage, a figure sat still. It was a woman. The manifest would have a name, but the territory knew her by a title. Spoken in whispers in cantinas and around frightened fires, Mariah Nantan, the desert Apache queen. She was not what the stories promised. There was no wildness in her eyes, no thrashing against the bars. She sat upright on the hard bench, her back straight, her hands bound in her lap. She was as calm as the stone of the mesa behind her. Dust powdered her black hair and settled in the lines of her face. But she did not blink. The only sign of a struggle, or a life lived hard, was a thin leather thong around her neck. It had held turquoise once. Now, only a single, jagged half-bead remained, a chip of broken sky against her skin. Rowan felt the heat building, a physical weight on his shoulders. The warden spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dust, the sizzle lost in the morning's quiet. "She's worth more than the trouble she costs," the warden said, his voice a wet rasp. He was talking to Rowan, to the station master cowering in the doorway, to the empty desert itself. "Horace Vale pays top dollar for this one." Rowan said nothing. His eyes were on Mariah. She was looking at him, not with defiance, not with pleading, but with a flat, assessing calm that unsettled him more than any threat could. He pushed himself off the trough. His spurs made no sound. He had wrapped the rowels in cloth, a habit from a life that valued silence. He walked toward the wagon, his hands open and away from the Colt at his hip. The warden shifted, the shotgun lifting an inch. "That's close enough. Mr." Rowan stopped. He unslung his canteen. The sound of the water sloshing inside was obscene in the dry air. "She looks dry," Rowan said, his voice flat. "She's a prisoner. She gets water when I say, and you look like a man who appreciates a good smoke." Rowan's other hand went to his shirt pocket, pulling out a small, cloth-wrapped pouch of tobacco. It was the good kind, from south of the border. "A trade. Water for her, tobacco for you. And a look at the manifest. Crow Vale owes me pay. Want to make sure my name is on the right ledger before Vale's men get here." It was a lie, thin as creek water, but it was plausible. Greed warred with suspicion on the warden's face. He looked at the pouch, then at the sun, then back at Rowan. Vale's men were coming. That part was true. And this stop was just a formality. "You don't hand me nothing." The warden grunted. "You set it on the ground. Then back up." He unhooked the heavy ring of keys from his belt, "and I'll check the ledger. But only 'cause Mr. Vale likes his paperwork tidy." Rowan placed the canteen and the tobacco on the scorched earth. He backed away. 10 full paces. The warden grunted again. Satisfied, he picked up the pouch, sniffed it, and grinned, stuffing it into his own pocket. He left the canteen. Then he turned to the wagon, fumbling with the keys. He selected a long, rust-colored key and jammed it into the heavy padlock. "Just checking the list." "Queenie," he sneered, pulling a sheaf of folded papers from his vest. "Gotta make sure you're still you." The lock groaned. The warden pulled it free and slid the thick iron bolt. The cage door was heavy. and the hinge screamed like a dying rabbit as he pulled it open just wide enough to stick his head and shoulders inside. Angling the manifest to catch the light, Rowan watched. Maria had not moved. The warden squinted at the paper. Nantan, Maria, 1 count treason, 2 counts murder, 12 counts. He never finished. It was not a movement. It was an event. Like lightning, it was too fast to see, only to understand after. Maria's bound hands came up, the chain between them catching the warden's thick wrist. She jerked her elbow back, pulling his weight forward. He stumbled into the cage, his face colliding with the opposite bars. The manifest flew from his hand. In that single, fluid motion, her fingers, small but strong, plucked the ring of keys from his belt. She didn't stop. As he reeled, she twisted, bringing her feet up. She used his own knife, the one sheathed at his hip. There was a slide, a glint of steel, and a soft, wet sound. The warden made a noise, a surprised cough. He sagged, his eyes wide, looking at Rowan. He was dead before his knees hit the floorboards of the cage. Maria Nantan stood over him. She found the key to her shackles on the ring. The lock snapped open. She pulled the manacles from her wrists, her skin raw beneath. She let the cuffs fall. They hit the wooden floor not with a loud, triumphant clang, but with a soft, final thud. It was the sound of a debt being settled. It was the sound of freedom. Silence descended again, heavier this time, broken only by the warden's blood dripping. A slow, steady tap-tap-tap onto the thirsty ground below. Maria stepped out of the cage, into the full, bloody light of the morning. The warden's knife was in her hand, dark to the hilt. She did not look at the dead man. She walked directly to Rowan Calder. She stopped 2 feet from him, well within his space. He could smell the cage on her, the close, metallic smell of fear and dried sweat. But under it, there was the scent of the desert itself, of dust and dry herbs. She looked up at him. Her eyes were not calm now. They were alive, burning with an intensity that matched the sun. "You just paid to listen," she said. Her voice was low, a rasp, but it cut through the morning air. "So listen. You work for me now." Rowan's mind, frozen for a second, caught up. He had seen men killed. He had killed men. But this was different. This was an execution, and he was a witness who had supplied the distraction. His hand twitched, a reflexive move toward the Colt he had not used. "Ma'am, I think you have this." He did not see her move. The warden's knife was gone, and her hand was empty. And then it was not. A Colt revolver, small but efficient, was in her grip. It had been tucked in the small of her back, beneath her ragged shirt. The warden had missed it. Everyone had missed it. The barrel of the Colt was not aimed at his chest. It was pressed hard against the bone of his hip. He felt the cold circle of the muzzle through his clothes. He heard the hammer click back, a sound louder than the entire morning. "I say stand. You stand," Maria Nantan whispered. Her eyes locked on his. The barrel dug deeper. "I say walk. You walk. You breathe because I allow it." Do you understand? Rowan understood many things. He understood the pressure of the gun. He understood that the station master, who had been a frozen statue in the doorway, was now gone. He could see the frantic, splayed boot prints leading away from the station, disappearing around the corner of the dry goods store. He could hear the faint, desperate scramble of a man running for his life. And then he saw what Maria was seeing. She was not looking at him. She was looking past him, to the west. Rowan turned his head. Slowly, on the western horizon, where the land met the sky, a plume of dust rose. It was high, it was wide, and it was moving fast. It was not a breeze. It was not a dust devil. It was horses. Dozens of them. Horace Vale's men. Maria said it was not a guess. The dust cloud was a promise of fire and lead. The woman at his hip was a guarantee of the same. Rowan looked at the dust, then back at her. He felt the sun on the back of his neck, the cold steel at his side. He was caught between 2 impossible things. He gave a single, short nod. The motion was stiff, pulling at the dry skin of his throat. Rowan swallowed hard. First order. The gun did not move. It remained a cold, hard circle of pressure against his hip bone. A period at the end of a sentence he had not been allowed to speak. The dust cloud on the horizon was visibly larger now, its edges boiling in the morning light. It was no longer a warning. It was a deadline. "My horse is over there," Rowan said, his voice low. "If we are running, we are not running." Mariah cut him off. The colt's muzzle pressed harder. A sharp reminder. "We are moving. You are taking orders. First order your horse. It is too good. It will be recognized. Unsaddle it. Turn it loose. We take the wagon mules. They are slow, but they are anonymous." Rowan's eyes narrowed. Give up his horse in this country. That was a death sentence. It was his only advantage, his only way out. He looked at the dust cloud. They had maybe 20 minutes. They will be on us before we clear the mesa. "Your horse, Calder," she commanded. The knife, slick with the warden's life, was suddenly in her other hand. She used it to point, and the saddles from the wagon team. "We ride, but we ride as ghosts. Hide your tracks from the trough. Use the blanket from your bedroll. Make it look like no one was ever here but the dead." She turned and walked to the wagon, moving with a fluid grace that belied the cage she had just left. She retrieved her small Colt, checked its load, and tucked it back into the waistband of her trousers. Then she took the dead warden's rifle from the wagon bed, a heavy Winchester. She checked that too. Rowan was frozen, not by fear, but by a cold, calculating anger. He was being used. And after I do all this, what is in it for me, besides not getting a bullet in my hip? She looked back at him, her face unreadable. The sun caught the half-beat of turquoise at her throat. "You get to fix what you helped break." He did not understand. He moved, slowly, toward his horse, a fine-boned roan that whickered softly at his approach. "I do not know what you are talking about." "You will." She watched him, the rifle held easy in her arms. "My terms are simple. You will take me to Fort Barrow. You will help me retrieve what was stolen from my people, before the sun sets on the third day. Fort Barrow. That is a 2-day ride in the best conditions. And what was stolen, the scepter of the turquoise," she said, her voice dropping, taking on a resonance that felt older than the stones around them. "And the land ledger Horace Vale is keeping in the quartermaster's safe." Rowan paused, his hand on his saddle horn. A ledger. A fort. This was not a simple prison break. This was a conspiracy. That is a suicide run. The fort is garrisoned, which is why you are my guide. She gestured with the rifle barrel. "Now, the saddle, and the rules." Rowan's hands began to work, unbuckling the cinch, his movements fast and practiced. He heaved the heavy saddle from the roan's back and dumped it in the dust. The horse shook its mane, confused. "The rules," he repeated, his back to her as he began wiping their tracks with his blanket. The dust was fine, like flour, and rose in choking clouds. "One," she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the rising heat. "You do not touch me, not unless I give you permission, not for any reason." He swept the blanket, his jaw tight. "Two, when we find my people, you do not speak for me. You do not look them in the eye. You are my voice, not theirs. You are nothing to them." The tracks from the trough were gone, erased in a chaotic smudge. "3, you do not make a promise you cannot keep. To me, or to anyone we meet, a broken word is a broken neck," he finished, throwing the blanket over the wagon's driver's seat. He slapped his horse on the rump. "Get, boy. Go." The roan, startled, trotted a few paces, then broke into a canter, heading for the high chaparral. Rowan watched it go, a piece of his own soul running with it. He turned to face her. "And my rule, just one, when this is done, when you have your scepter and your book, I am free to go. No arguments, no bullets in the back. I ride out, and we are square." Mariah held his gaze. The desert wind pulled at a loose strand of her black hair. "When I say you are done, you go," she replied. It was not an agreement. It was a statement of her authority. He would have to live with that. He moved to the wagon team, his knife out, cutting the mules free from their harnesses. They were scrawny, Miserable-looking animals, but they were tough. Why veil? Rowan asked, his hands busy. He is a freighter. What does he want with an Apache scepter and a land ledger? The scepter is for power, Mariah said, grabbing 2 sets of mule bridles from the station wall. The ledger is for money. Vale is not just a freighter. He is a thief. He and his partner are selling the dry springs. My people's springs. Rowan looked up. The dry springs. There is no water there. Has not been for 5 years. There will be, she said, her voice bitter. And he knows it. He plans to sell the land to the Slatewater Railroad using a forged ledger, a ledger that says my people agreed to the sale. He thinks if he holds the scepter, he holds our magic. He is a fool, but he is a rich fool. Rowan thought of the dust cloud. Vale's men, they are not just coming for you, they are coming to protect his investment. They are coming for me, she said flatly. The rest is just business. The men he sends will be the worst. Quinn Brody, a man who smiles when he kills. Rowan's blood chilled. He knew the name. Brody was Vale's right hand, a gunman with a reputation from here to the border, and he will have Sutter Pike with him. To read the ground, she continued, as if reciting a list. Pike can track a shadow over bare rock, which is why we are not going where he expects. She threw him a bridle. We go through Red Comet Wash. He will think we are avoiding it. Rowan caught it. Red Comet is a box canyon. If they trap us in there, we are finished. We will not be trapped. She pointed. Get the canteen you offered me, and any grain you can find. We leave now. As he gathered the meager supplies from the station, a half-full bag of oats, his own canteen, and one other he filled from the trough, a thought struck him. A cold, sick realization. He walked back to her, the canteen slung over his shoulder. The mules were bridled, standing with the dull patience of their kind. This ledger, Rowan said, his voice quiet. The land survey, the one Vale is using. It is a fake, she said, tying a rope into a makeshift hackamore for her own mule. But it would be based on a real survey. Rowan pushed. To look legitimate, he would need real maps of the dry springs, real coordinates. Mariah stopped, her hands still on the rope. She turned to him, and her eyes, which had been burning with purpose, became still. A deep, cold stillness, like the green-black of serpentine stone. What do you know about it? He swallowed, the dust thick in his throat. There was no lying to this woman. Not now. Before I was what I am now, I was a surveyor. I led the party. For the Vale brothers. I drew the maps of the Red Comet Wash and the dry springs. 2 years ago, the silence that followed was absolute. It was deeper than the silence of the desert, more profound than the silence of the dead warden behind them. Mariah's face was a mask of stone. He saw the muscles in her jaw tighten. He saw her knuckles turn white on the rifle stock. He braced for the bullet. When she finally spoke, her voice was not loud. It was a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout. You measured the land, she said. You drew the lines that they used to choke us. I did not know, he said, and the words sounded weak, pathetic. It was just a job. Lines on paper. I did not know what they planned. You did not know, she repeated. It was not a question. It was a sentence. She looked past him, at the empty, shimmering air. You owe this desert more than you owe me, Rowan called her. You owe the ghosts you helped make. She turned away from him, slinging the rifle over her back. She mounted the mule in one smooth motion. Rowan stood there, the weight of his admission crushing him. He had been running from that job for 2 years. Now, it had caught him. He looked at his gun, the Colt at his hip. He pulled the leather thong from his bedroll, the one he used to tie it down. Instead, he tied it in a tight knot around the butt of his pistol. It was a new piece of cloth, clean, a marker, a sign of service. Not to her, to the debt. He swung onto the bare, bony back of his mule. Mariah Nantan kicked her animal into a rough trot. We ride, and we do not stop until the sun is high. They will be looking for a fast horse, not 2 stray mules. They left Mesquite Crossing at a steady, ground-covering pace. They left the dead warden and the abandoned wagon and the ghost of Rowan's horse. The sun climbed, beating on the back of the sky, making the air shimmer like thick, hot tinsel. They were a mile into the scrub, heading for the distant, blood-red gash of the wash. When the sound reached them, it was faint, carried on the hot wind, a thin, brassy note, a hunting horn. Quinn Brody was on the field. The pursuit had officially begun. They moved with 10 breaths of space between them. It was not a negotiated distance. It was a law that had established itself in the silence. 10 breaths of hot, shimmering air separated the tail of her mule from the nose of his. It was close enough to be a unit, far enough to be two separate, wary animals. The sun was no longer a light. It was a physical weight, a predator with teeth. It beat down on Rowan's shoulders, pressing him into the mule's bony spine. The heat was a furnace blast, and the air itself seemed to vibrate, making the distant red mesas look like they were melting at the edges. The only sounds were the persistent, grit-filled shuffle of the mule's hooves on the hardpan, the creak of old leather, and the high, thin whine of insects that were too mean to die. Rowan, a man who had made his living reading the land, now read the woman in front of him. He watched her. She rode with an economy of motion he had never seen. She was part of the mule, moving with its rhythm, her spine straight, her head up. She did not fight the animal. She guided it with a pressure of the knees, a subtle shift of her weight, when they had to dismount to navigate a treacherous wash of broken shale. He watched her feet. She placed them with absolute intention. Never a wasted step, never a loose boot scrape that might send a rock skittering, leaving a sign for Sutter Pike. She moved like water, flowing over the difficult ground, conserving every ounce of energy, and that was when he saw it. It was a slight hitch in her rhythm as she climbed the opposite bank. She put her weight on her right foot, using the rifle as a brief crutch to push herself up, just for a second. But he saw it. He looked closer. The deerskin of her trousers, on the left side, just above the hip, was dark. It was a stiff, black-red stain that the fine desert dust clung to, making a patch of mapped terrain on her body. The wind shifted. It had been at their backs, pushing them, but now it swirled. Coming from her to him, it carried her scent, under the smell of dust and the sharp, herbal tang of the mule. He caught it. It was not the heavy, copper smell of a fresh kill. It was thin, sharp, the faint, metallic smell of old iron, old blood, mixed with sweat. She was wounded. The warden had not done it. The knife she had used on him was clean until it met him. This was from before. This was from the cage. She was hiding it from him, and hiding it from the men who hunted them. Every step she took was calculated to avoid showing the pain, to avoid leaving a single drop of blood for a tracker to find. The sun climbed to its zenith, a merciless white circle hammered into the pale blue sheet of the sky. It leached the color from the world, leaving only shades of beige and rust. Rowan's throat felt like it was packed with sand and old wool. He pulled his canteen from his pack. The sloshing sound was obscene in the silence. He uncapped it, took a single, brief swallow, letting the lukewarm water soak the dust in his mouth before it trickled down his throat. He nudged his mule forward, closing the 10-breath gap. Maria did not turn her head, but her body went rigid. The Winchester, which had been resting across her lap, shifted. Its muzzle tracked him as he came alongside. Her mule, sensing the tension, flicked its ears. He stopped his own animal. He held out the canteen, his arm straight, his palm open. "Just water," he said. His voice was a dry croak. She looked at him. Then her eyes moved to the canteen. She stared at it. Her face was a mask of dust and suspicion. He watched her expression, and he saw that she was not looking at it as a canteen. She was looking at it as a weapon, as a trap, as a trick so obvious it had to be a lie. He was the man who had drawn the maps, the man who had helped, knowingly or not, to steal her land. Why would he offer her life? He did not move. He did not pull the canteen back. He just held it, steady, the sun flashing a single sharp glint off the wet tin. The moment stretched, hotter than the air. Slowly, her hand came up. Her fingers were long, the knuckles scarred, the nails broken. She did not grab the canteen from him. She waited, her hand open, until he placed it in her palm. Her eyes never left his. She uncapped it. She did not drink. She sniffed the opening, a short, sharp intake of air. Only then did she lift it to her lips. She did not take a grateful sip. It was an angry, necessary act. Her head tilted back, and he saw the strong, clean line of her throat. He watched the muscles work as she took 3 quick, hard swallows. She capped it. She thrust it back at him, her arms stiff. The transaction was over. She kicked her mule, her heels digging in, and the animal grunted, moving ahead. The 10-breath distance was reestablished, but the air between them had changed. 2 hours later, they found shade. Glasswing Canyon. It was not a canyon. Really, just a deep, narrow fissure in the sandstone, as if a giant had struck the earth with an axe. It was barely wide enough for a single mule to pass. The walls rose 500 feet, sheer and the color of dried blood, and the sun had not touched the sandy floor in 1,000 years. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees instantly. The air was still, cool, and silent. They dismounted. The mules stood with their heads down, flanks heaving, their breath echoing slightly in the narrow space. In the canyon wall, there was a shallow alcove, worn smooth by ancient floods. It offered a patch of deep, profound shade, a pocket of safety, but it was small. It was shade built for one person, one mountain lion hiding from the heat. Maria moved into it first. She slid down the rock wall, her back against the cool stone, and folded into a crouch. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and in that unguarded second, Rowan saw the mask fall. A spasm of pure, unadulterated pain flashed across her face, tightening her lips into a thin white line. It was the wound. He stood at the mouth of the alcove, a few feet away. In the lesser shade, he was the prisoner, the employee. He would give her the territory. She opened her eyes. They fixed on him, dark and annoyed. "What are you doing, resting?" he said. "You are standing in the sun," she pointed out. He looked. The line of shade had shifted. The full, brutal light was just now touching his boots, crawling up his legs. Maria let out a breath, a short, sharp sound of profound irritation. She shifted her body, moving a solid 12 inches to her right, pressing herself against the hard curve of the alcove. It was not an invitation. It was a command. She had made just enough space for 2. "Do not be stupidly polite," she snapped, her voice sharp. "A dead man is no use to me. Sit. We rest until the heat breaks." Rowan hesitated. Then he moved. He slid down the cool sandstone wall, his back against it. The space was exactly as she had made it. His shoulder pressed against hers. It was a shock, like touching a hot wire. Through the thin, sweat-damp cloth of his shirt and the worn deerskin of hers, he could feel the heat radiating from her. Not the heat of the sun, the heat of her body, the furnace of her life. He was suddenly, overwhelmingly aware of her. He could smell the dust in her hair, the iron of her blood, the faint, clean scent of her skin. He sat perfectly still, staring at the opposite canyon wall, a blank canvas of red rock. He could hear her breathing. It was fast, too shallow, pain. He listened. He focused on the sound of her breath, and gradually, as her body accepted the shade and the rest, the rhythm of it slowed. It deepened. He could feel the slight movement of her shoulder against his as her lungs filled and emptied. The silence of the canyon was absolute. "The wound," Rowan said. His voice sounded like a rock slide in the quiet. Her entire body went rigid. Her shoulder became a knot of stone against his. "What of it? It needs to be cleaned. In this heat, it will fester. You will have a fever by morning. I am fine." "No," he said, not with anger, but with the flat certainty of his trade. "You are not. You are favoring it. If you go lame, you will be slow. Sutter Pike will find us before we clear the wash. I am not getting shot in the back because you are too proud to clean a cut." She turned her head. Her face was only inches from his, Her eyes were black, bottomless, and filled with a fire that could have burned him alive. "And you are a doctor now, a surveyor doctor. I am a man who has been cut," he said, his voice low, matching hers, "and shot. And I know what this land does to open meat. I have water. I can burn a yucca root for ash. It will clean it. It will stop the bleeding." He held her gaze. "Only if you agree." He watched the war in her eyes, the pride fighting the pain, the suspicion fighting the cold logic. She looked from his eyes to his hip, to the colt tied with the new cloth. She looked at his hands, calloused and scraped. Assent was not a word. It was a long, slow breath, a surrender, not to him, but to necessity. She gave a single, sharp nod. Her eyes never left his gun. He slid away from her. The place where her shoulder had been felt instantly cold. He moved into the slivery light and unslung his pack. He found the dry, fibrous piece of yucca root he kept for tinder. He pulled out his flint and steel. He scraped a small patch of the sandy floor clean and, with a sharp strike, sparked a tiny, brief fire. He held the root in the flame until it blackened and smoked. Then he crushed the hot charcoal in the cup of his palm. He poured a small, precious capful of water from his canteen onto the black powder, mixing it with his finger into a thick, dark paste. He turned back to her. She had not moved from the wall, but she had unlaced the side of her deerskin trousers. She had a wadded piece of cloth pressed against her side. As he watched, she pulled it away. His breath caught. It was not a graze. It was a long, deep gash, the length of his hand. The edges were angry and red, the skin around it already swollen. It was a knife wound, a stab. He looked at the black paste on his fingers. "This will sting. Get it done," she said. Her voice was stone. He moved back, kneeling in front of her. He brought his hand to her side. His fingers were shaking. He stopped, his hand hovering an inch from her skin. It was not fear. He was not afraid she would stab him. It was the sudden, shocking intimacy of the act. He was breaking her first rule. He was touching her. He was touching this wild, deadly woman in a place of profound vulnerability. He was touching the life that was trying to seep out of her. She saw it. She saw his hand tremble. He expected a sneer, a command to hurry, a threat. She said nothing. Her gaze, which had been locked on his gun, shifted. It moved to his trembling hand, and then, slowly, up to his face. Her expression did not soften, but the murderous rage in her eyes was replaced by a look of pure, clinical observation. She was not seeing a threat. She was not seeing a man. She was seeing a fact, and she filed it away. He took a breath. He pressed his fingers, covered in the black paste, directly into the open wound. Mariah hissed, a sharp, violent intake of air that sounded like a snake. Her whole body locked, her back slamming against the rock wall, her hands clenched into fists in her lap, her knuckles white. But she did not cry out. She did not move. His hand was steady now. The tremor was gone, burned away by the act itself. He worked quickly, impersonally, packing the crude antiseptic into the entire length of the cut, the black paste against her brown skin. When he was finished, he took his own kerchief from his neck. It was stained with sweat, but clean enough. He folded it into a thick pad. "Hold this. Hard." She took it, her fingers brushing his, and pressed it hard against her side. He helped her relace the deerskin, his fingers working the leather thongs, his knuckles brushing her hip. The work was technical, finished. He sat back against the wall, sliding into his spot, shoulder to shoulder. The silence that fell was different. The space was smaller. The air was hotter, charged. It smelled of the canyon, of stone, of leather, and of the sharp, medicinal tang of the yucca ash. And it smelled of her. A line had been crossed, a transaction made of pain and water and ash. An unnamed, unacknowledged force was moving between them, born in the close heat and the shared breath of the tiny, dark space. They sat for a long time, not speaking, listening to the desert breathe around them. Finally, Mariah spoke. Her voice was low. the command still in it, but the sharp, brittle edge was gone, blunted by fatigue and the shared moment. "When the sun cracks the horizon," she said, her eyes on the sliver of bright, burning sky far above them. "We move." The sun cracked the horizon, just as she had said. They moved. The shade of Glasswing Canyon fell away, leaving them stripped bare to the sky. The cool, still air of the alcove was a memory, sharp and clean. The air of the open ground was a hot, physical weight, tasting of dust and alkali. Rowan's shoulder, which had been pressed against hers, felt strangely cold, though the heat was already building. The wound on her side, he knew, must be a line of fire. She gave no sign, save for a stiffness in her back. The wash widened, its red walls lowering, spitting them out onto the banks of the Mesquite Ford. It was not a river. It was a wide, sluggish artery of brown, muddy water, the only crossing for 20 miles in either direction. The banks were a mire of reeds and thick, sucking mud, and it was not empty. They were dug in on the far bank. Rowan saw them first. Not 10 men, a dozen. They were not hidden. They were deployed. They had Spencer repeating rifles, their barrels glinting, and at the flanks, 2 men on horseback, not with guns, but with lariats, their loops already wide, a trap, a net. In the center, standing tall on a dry hummock, was Quinn Brody. He wore a dark duster, unbuttoned, revealing a waistcoat of embroidered silk. He looked like a preacher who had lost his faith and found a gun. He smiled, a wide, white smile that did not touch his eyes. "That is far enough, Queenie," Brody's voice carried, easy and clear, over the slow-moving water. "A bit far from home, are you not?" Mariah did not stop. She did not slow. Her mule kept walking, its hooves sinking into the soft mud of the bank. She ignored Brody entirely. She looked past him, to the high ridge on the east, the one that flanked the ford. Her gaze was sharp, focused. She raised her left hand, high and clear, 2 fingers extended. Quinn Brody laughed, a short, barking sound. "Praying to your spirits, they cannot help you now. We have orders from Mr. Vale. You are to be brought in, alive, if possible, dead, if convenient." Rowan's hand was on the butt of his Colt, the one with the new cloth. He was measuring the distance, 70 yards, too far for a pistol, fine for a Spencer. He looked where she pointed, high on the ridgeline. A single, sharp plume of black smoke erupted into the clean blue. It was not a bonfire. It was precise, an arrow, wrapped in pitch-soaked fibers, shot into a prepared nest of dry resin weed. It was a signal. Her people. They were here. They were watching. The smile vanished from Quinn Brody's face. He had seen it too. "Damn her," he snarled. "Firebox them in, take their animals." Lead split the air. Not a volley. A rolling, chaotic crackle. Bullets chewed the mud at the mule's feet. The water of the ford erupted in white, angry splashes. The 2 riders with lariats spurred their horses, charging into the water, trying to flank them. Rowan did not hesitate. He did not aim for Brody. He did not aim for the men behind the rifles. He aimed for the chaos. He aimed for the horses. He drew his Colt. He fired. One, the rider on the left, his lariat spinning, was suddenly on a falling horse. The animal screamed, its front legs buckling, and it collapsed into the river, sending a huge wave of brown water into the air. The rider went down with it. Trapped. 2, 3. Rowan's other shots were not for the riders. They were for the line of tethered mounts, standing behind Brody's main line. A stupid, arrogant mistake. A fine-looking paint horse reared, its eyes white with terror, and tore its reins from the man holding it. It bolted, crashing back through the camp. Another horse, a solid gray, dropped as if its legs had been cut. "My horse! He shot my horse!" one of the gunmen screamed, turning from the fight to look at the chaos. "Stay on the line, you fool!" Brody bellowed. But the ambush was broken. The disciplined line of fire was gone. Rowan's 3 shots had shattered their formation, split their focus. He had forced them to choose between their prisoners and their ride home. In that instant, Mariah was gone. She had slid from the mule's back before the echo of the first shot had died. She was not running. She was a blade, moving through the waist-deep reeds at the river's edge. Sutter Pike, the tracker, was on their side of the bank, hidden. He had been trying to get behind them. He rose from the reeds, his rifle coming up, his face a mask of surprise. He was too slow. Maria hit him. She did not use her gun. She did not use her knife. She used her entire body. Her shoulder drove into his chest with a sound like a wet axe splitting wood. His rifle flew from his hands, arcing, and disappeared into the suck of the mud. Her hand, the one that was not holding her Colt, was at his throat. She did not stop. She used his own weight, spun him around, and slammed him face first into the muddy bank, over the crackle of gunfire. Rowan heard the other sounds, the distinct, wet thud of Pike's face hitting the mud, the sharp, wet snap of a bone breaking, a muffled, desperate gasp as Pike tried to breathe and got a lungful of mud, water, bone, breath. Gunfire was still coming from the far bank, but it was wild now, and it was being answered. Arrows, not a volley, but 2 or 3, hissing from the ridge line. An unseen ally was pinning Brody's men. Rowan kicked his mule, driving it deeper into the reeds, pulling Mariah's mule with it. He looked for her. She was already on her feet, pulling Pike's head from the mud by his hair. Then Rowan saw it. Hidden in a tangle of reeds, dislodged by the falling horse. A canvas-topped wagon was slowly tipping into the current. It was filled to the brim with heavy, burlap sacks. "Chokonin barley," Mariah panted. Her voice was a snarl. She was at his side, her pistol smoking. "Winter stores. They stole our food." The wagon tilted further. 1, 2, then a half-dozen sacks tumbled into the brown river. They did not sink. The tightly woven burlap and the packed grain made them buoyant, floating low in the water like dead animals. The gunfire from the far bank lessened. They were reloading. They were confused. An idea, sharp and sudden, lit in Rowan's mind. "The sacks," he said, grabbing her arm. "They look like bodies. In the water." She looked at him, her eyes black, not understanding. "Draw their fire," he said, his voice urgent. He shoved the mule away and waded deeper, pushing one of the heavy, floating sacks into the faster current. "They will think it is us. They will follow. They will come into the water." He did not wait for her permission. He shoved another. "A wet Spencer is just a heavy club." She understood. Instantly. They worked together, side by side in the muddy water, shoving the floating sacks out into the main channel. "There they are in the water," a man shouted from the far bank, pointing at the decoys. "They are floating away. Do not let them escape." It worked. 2 of Brody's men, eager for a kill, charged down the bank and into the ford, holding their rifles high. They were focused on the floating sacks, on the imagined bodies. An arrow hissed from the ridge, a short, sharp sound. One of the men grunted, his hand flying to his shoulder, a black shaft sprouting from his collarbone. The other man, his eyes on his falling partner, slipped on the slick, unseen river stones. He went down, a full-body splash, and his Spencer disappeared under the brown water. He came up sputtering, choking, his gun a useless weight. The fight was over. It had not been a battle. It had been a breaking. Quinn Brody, his face a mask of black fury, saw it all. His ambush shattered, his men down, his horses scattered, his trackers in the mud. He grabbed his wounded man by the collar and dragged him bodily back into the brush. It was a full, panicked retreat. Silence fell, thick and heavy. It was broken only by the sucking sound of the mud, the slow gurgle of the river, and the wet, choking groans of Sutter Pike. Rowan pulled Pike's head up. The man was a ruin, his nose clearly broken, his face a mask of mud and blood. Rowan used Pike's own belt to tie his hands. Mariah stood over him. She did not kick him. She did not threaten him. She just looked down, her chest heaving, her breathing harsh. Her silence was a suffocating weight. "He will kill me," Pike whimpered, his voice a ruined nasal whine. Brody will find out I was caught. He will kill me. Brody is gone, Mariah said. Her voice was cold. I am here. Where is it? Where is what? I do not know anything. Mariah looked at Rowan. Hold his head. Rowan hesitated. This was not part of the deal. Hold it, she commanded. He grabbed Pike's thick hair, yanking his head back, exposing his throat. Mariah drew the dead warden's knife. She did not put the point to his throat. She laid the flat, cold, heavy steel against his cheek. Pike shrieked, a high, thin sound. The scepter! The ledger! Fort Barrow! Pike cried, his body convulsing, his eyes squeezed shut. It is at Fort Barrow in the quartermaster's safe. He is lying, Rowan said, his voice flat. A quartermaster's safe is for payroll and whiskey, not for stolen goods. It is March, Pike screamed, tears and snot mixing with the blood. Deputy Evan March. It is his safe, his private safe. Vale has him on the payroll. March is holding it for him. He is sealing the deal tonight. The railroad men, they are coming on the sunrise train. The deal has to be done, the ledger signed, before they get here. The scepter of the turquoise, the forged ledger, a corrupt deputy, all in one place. Mariah stared at Pike, then slowly wiped the knife clean on the tracker's own shirt. She sheathed it. She looked at the sun, which was now climbing, burning away the morning, promising a brutal noon. We cannot, Rowan said, standing up. The fort will be locked down. It is a fortress. We can... Mariah turned to him. Her eyes were not on him. They were on the northern horizon, on the goal. We infiltrate tonight. We get the ledger and the scepter, and we are gone before that sunrise train ever whistles. She left Pike tied and gagged, but dragged him to higher, drier ground where he would be found. She caught her mule and the other, and from the abandoned tack of Brody's men, she found a good saddle, a full canteen, and a sack of dried jerky. She mounted. As Rowan finished checking the cinch on his own new saddle, she looked down at him. The dust of the fight was on her. Her face was streaked with mud. The wound on her side, he knew, had to be screaming. She ignored it. Good work, she said. Her voice was flat. But remember, you work for me. Rowan Calder paused. He looked up at her, this impossible woman, sitting on a mule, her rifle across her lap. He thought of the maps he had drawn. He thought of the debt he owed this land. He thought of the cold, clean way she had broken the ambush, the way she had used his own tactic without question. He nodded. The obedience was still there, but the reason for it had changed. It was not born of the gun she had pressed to his hip. It was not born of fear. It was born of respect. Yes, ma'am, he said, swinging into the saddle. Show me the way. They rode into the teeth of a dying sun. Fort Barrow was a full day's hard ride northwest, and the land between was a cruel, broken slate. The high ground was behind them. The open plain was a trap. So Rowan, following Mariah's lead, had guided them into the shallow, winding maze of the glass-wing arroyos. It was a place of bad acoustics and worse footing. The wind, funneled by the narrow sandstone walls, had been moaning for an hour before the light changed. It did not get dark. It turned yellow, a sick, sulphurous, bruised yellow that flattened the landscape, stealing all shadows, making the world a two-dimensional, threatening painting. The wind is stopping, Rowan said, pulling his mule to a halt. The air was unnaturally still, heavy and hot. Mariah was already dismounting. She looked at the sky, her black hair unmoving in the dead air. No, she said, her voice low. It is waiting. It is gathering. Then it hit, not as a gust, but as a solid wall of sand. The world vanished. One moment they were in a canyon, the next they were in a roaring, churning void of grit and noise. The sound was a physical weight, a high-pitched, grinding scream that seemed to come from inside his skull. It was not a storm. It was the desert trying to scour them from its skin. Rowan was blind. He grabbed the bridle of Mariah's mule, pulling the animals close, turning their backs to the assault. He tasted the world. It was pure grit, filling his mouth, his nose, his eyes. Through the brown-red chaos, He saw a black smear in the rock face, 10 yards away, a dark, hollow space, an alcove, barely larger than a wagon bed. There he yelled, but the sound was stolen from his lips, ripped away by the wind. He did not wait for her. He grabbed her arm, the one that was not holding the rifle, and pulled. He felt her stumble, then regain her footing. He half dragged, half led the mules and the woman into the shallow shelter. They fell into the relative calm of the alcove. The storm did not stop, but it passed the mouth of their cave, a solid, roaring river of sand. The air inside the small space was thick with dust, but it was breathable. Distant thunder rumbled, not the crack of a summer storm, but a low, deep vibration, as if the ground itself was a great, hollow drum being beaten from below. They were safe, but they were trapped. It was dark in the alcove. Rowan tied the mules to a dead root. As deep in the shelter as they could get, he turned. Mariah was a silhouette against the roaring, dusty mouth of the cave. She had sunk to the ground, her back against the curved sandstone wall. He moved to sit opposite her. The space was small. His knees were only a few feet from hers. For a long time, neither spoke. There was nothing to say. The howl of the wind was the only conversation. Hours passed. The storm did not abate. The air grew cold, a biting, dry chill that found its way through cloth and leather. Rowan built a fire. It was a risk, but the wind was too strong. It would disperse the smoke instantly, and the light would not carry. He used the last of his dry tinder and a few sticks of mesquite. A small, smokeless flame sprang to life, a tiny, defiant bead of orange in the suffocating dark. The firelight threw their shadows, huge and flickering, against the walls. And in that light, he saw her face. It was the color of pale ash. A fine sheen of sweat covered her temples, and her lips were pressed into a thin, white line. She had her hand pressed to her side, to the wound. "It is the mud," she said. Her voice was a dry, pained rasp. "From the river. It got in." She tried to unlace the deerskin with her left hand, her right still holding the rifle, which lay across her lap. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy with pain. She fumbled with the wet, grimy leather thong. A low sound of pure, animal frustration escaped her. Rowan put another small stick on the fire. "Let me—" She froze. Her hand stopped moving. Her head snapped up, her eyes, black and deep in the firelight, fixed on him. The first rule. "You do not touch me," the wind howled, a perfect, mournful sound. He did not move closer. He stayed where he was, his hands open, palms up, by the fire. The cold is locking your fingers, and you need both hands to clean it properly. The mud will poison you. You will be dead by sunrise, and I will be alone, with Quinn Brody's men between me and the fort. He held her gaze. "I am not asking for me. I am asking for the ledger." It was the right thing to say. He had given her a reason that was not about her, or him, or the strange, electric air that was always between them. He had made it about the mission. She watched him for a full minute. The only sound was the fire, and the grinding sand outside, slowly, deliberately. She laid her rifle on the ground, leaning it against the wall, just within her reach. She turned back to him, and she gave a single, sharp nod. Consent. He slid forward on his knees. The space was tiny. He was kneeling between her legs. It was the only way to get close enough to see. The intimacy of the position was stark, unavoidable. He could smell the river mud on her, the iron of her blood, the scent of her sweat. He took the warden's knife, the one he now carried, and used the point to carefully, slowly, pick at the hardened knot of the leather thong. He did not look at her face. He focused on the task. The laces came loose. He folded back the deerskin, the bandage, his own kerchief. Was a ruin. It was black with river mud and stiff with half-dried blood. He pulled it away, his touch as gentle as he could make it. She hissed, a sharp, violent intake of air. Her entire body went rigid. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Do not be sorry," she commanded, her voice thin. "Be finished." The wound itself was angry, the edges red and swollen. He used the last of his water from the canteen. pouring a small, precious stream onto a clean corner of his shirt, to wash the grit away. His hand was shaking. He stopped, his hand hovering an inch from her skin. He was intensely aware of the warmth radiating from her, of the soft vulnerability of the skin just below the wound. She saw it. He could feel her gaze on his hands. "You are shaking," she stated. Her voice was quiet, a simple observation over the scream of the wind. He focused on wiping the edge of the cut. "I do not want to hurt you." He finished cleaning it. He took the last of his yucca ash, the black powder, and prepared to pack it. He looked up to tell her to brace herself. She was watching him. Her face, inches from his, was illuminated by the fire. Her eyes were not angry. They were not suspicious. They were just seeing. "And because you want to touch," she said. It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was a fact. She had seen it in him. She had seen the lie in his purely professional excuse. His hand, full of black ash, froze. He looked into her eyes. The whole world, the storm, the mission, Quinn Brody, all of it, contracted to this single point, this tiny, firelit space, and the truth that sat between them. He did not deny it. He could not. "Yes," he said. His voice was as raw as the wind. He expected her to pull the rifle, to order him back, to hit him. She held his gaze. Her own breath was shallow. Then she did the last thing he expected. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "I know, now. Finish the work." He took a breath. He packed the wound. She flinched, her hands clenching into white-knuckled fists in her lap, but she made no sound. He took the clean bandage he had made from his spare shirt and began to wrap it, a clean, tight binding around her waist. His hands had to circle her. He had to lean in, his face against her hair. He smelled the dust and the clean, faint scent of wood smoke in it. He tied the knot. He was finished. He should have moved back. He should have returned to his side of the fire. He did not. He was still kneeling, his hands resting on the new, clean bandage at her waist. She was still leaning back against the wall, and they were still looking at each other. The space between them was electric. The storm outside was a roaring in his blood. She lifted her hand, the one that was not in a fist. She lifted it slowly, as if it were a great weight. She did not raise it to strike him. She laid it, palm flat, against his chest. He stopped breathing. Under her hand, his heart, which had been steady, gave a single, violent, painful kick. Then it began to hammer, a frantic, desperate beat, a wild bird trapped in a cage. He did not move. He was a statue of stone. He did not touch her. He did not lean in. He waited. He let her feel the effect she had on him. He gave her the truth. Her eyes watched his, and he watched the small, dark fire in hers. He saw her breath hitch. Her fingers, which had been flat, slowly curled, gripping the rough cloth of his shirt. It was not a caress. It was an anchor. And then she gave a single, short, definite pull. It was all the permission he needed. He leaned in, closing the last few inches. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of necessity. It was dry. Chapped lips meeting in a moment of shared, desperate survival. It was tentative, a question. He tasted the dust of the storm on her. She did not pull away. She did not respond. She simply allowed it. She let him be there. Her breath, a warm, soft puff, met his. He pulled back, just a fraction. He looked at her. Her eyes were still open, locked on his. He leaned in again. This time, it was different. It was slower. It was deeper. It was a conscious choice. He kissed her with the cold of the storm and the heat of the fire. He kissed her with the respect he had earned and the debt he was paying. His hands, the ones that had been on her waist, slid up. He placed them on her shoulders, his thumbs resting on her collarbones, feeling the frantic pulse there. He held her, bracketing her, protecting her. His hands went no lower. This was not about taking. This was about holding. Her hand on his chest uncurled, her palm pressing flat again, as if to hold his wild heart in place. They stayed like that, locked together, a small, warm, breathing thing in the heart of the grinding storm. He felt a tremor go through her, a shudder from the cold, from the pain. He broke the kiss, but did not pull away. He rested his forehead against hers. They were breathing the same air. "Here," he whispered, his voice a gravelly ruin. "I know," she breathed, her lips moving against his. "Safe." The word hung in the air, a promise. The storm screamed, but it was outside. It could not get in. They pulled apart, slowly. The air between them was thick, changed forever. The fire crackled. A small, steady heart. Maria looked at him. The mask was gone. The queen was gone. It was just a woman, tired, in pain, and utterly, terrifyingly alive. A small, very small smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Do not misunderstand." "Calder," she said, her voice reclaiming its strength. "In the morning. You still work for me?" Rowan let out a breath he felt he had been holding since he left Mesquite. He looked at this woman who had just given him his life, and given him a different one, all in the same breath. "Yes, Queen," he said. Outside, the first thin, gray light of a false dawn began to show. The sandstorm was thinning. Inside, in the warm, dark alcove, an unnamed commitment had found its shape. The night air above Fort Barrow was thin and cold. It tasted of pine and high desert dust. They lay on a rocky spine, 1,000 yards from the fort's south wall. Two small, still shapes in a vast landscape of shadow. Below them, the fort was a black, geometric hole in the darkness, pricked by 3, maybe 4, yellow lanterns that seemed impossibly small and frail. A sliver of a new moon hung in the west, a curve of chipped bone that gave no light, only made the sky a deeper, more profound black. This was the hour before the infiltration, the hour of final checks, the hour of second thoughts. Rowan ran his hand along the length of the climbing rope for the 3rd time, feeling for any fray or weakness. It was a good rope, stolen from Brody's own camp, and the irony gave him a grim satisfaction. Maria sat beside him, not checking gear, but just being. She was still, her back to the stone, the Winchester rifle across her lap. She was watching the fort, not with tension, but with a hunter's patience. The air between them was no longer the electric, questioning space of the alcove. The kiss had changed it. It was no longer a void, but a shared, charged territory. It was a silence that demanded the rest of the truth. Rowan's hands stilled on the rope. He could not go over that wall with her, could not be her partner in this, with the biggest lie still sitting like a stone in his gut. He did not look at her. He looked down at the dark, sprawling shape of the fort, at the place where Evan March was waiting for a sunrise train. "There is more," he said. His voice was too loud in the stillness, and he lowered it to a rasp. "About the maps, the ones I drew for Vale." She did not turn her head. He did not need her to. He knew she was listening. "I told you I drew the maps of the dry springs. That was the first job, the one on the books. Vale paid me well for it, but then there was a second job, a private one. Horace Vale himself took me aside. He said he had a geological curiosity. He picked up a piece of charcoal from their long-dead, invisible fire. His fingers, numb with cold, fumbled for it. When I was surveying the Red Comet Wash, I found an anomaly, a place where the rock strata was wrong. I followed it, 5 miles north, into a box canyon that no one ever visits. The water was still there. Not a spring, an aquifer, a whole underground river, just waiting, trapped. I told Vale I was proud of the discovery. Just a piece of science." He stared at the black charcoal in his hand. "He paid me a bonus, a big one. He told me to map it, but to keep it off the official survey. A private map for a private project. He called it. He said it was his retirement. I took the money. I drew the map. And I told myself what all liars tell themselves. I told myself it was just a job." The silence from her was a physical thing. It was an invitation to continue, to purge the rest. I left. I went to Santa Viridian, and I drank most of that bonus. But the money felt heavy. I could not sleep. I told myself it was the whiskey, but it was the lie. I rode back 3 weeks later. I do not know what I was looking for. Proof, I guess, that it was just a job. He stopped. He could smell it again. The cold ash, the sickness on the wind. The village was gone. The one that sat at the mouth of the dry springs. The one I had marked on the public map as a temporary settlement. I got there, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was cold. The smell of ash, days old. I counted, he said, his voice flat, a recitation of a truth he had tried to bury for 2 years. I walked through it. 19 circles of ash where the lodges had been, 7 small piles of stones, stacked just so, too small for men, too small for women. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The horror of the unsaid was complete. He had not even killed them all. That was the worst part. He had just turned off the water. The map I drew showed him how. A single stick of dynamite in the right place, in that box canyon, would divert that aquifer. It would break the rock and send the water south, away from the wash, toward the land the railroad wanted, and it would dry up the old springs, the ones the village lived on. 13, he whispered. 13 elders. They were still there, sitting on the cracked mud of the spring bed. Just sitting, waiting. They did not even look at me when I rode up. They were just waiting for the water to come back, or for death. He finally turned to look at her. Her face was a sculpture of shadows, her eyes 2 black, unreadable voids. And the ropes, he said, his throat tight. The ones who had not starved, the ones who had protested, they were still hanging from the cottonwoods by the wash. Vale's men had not even bothered to cut them down. Old, stiff. I left, he said, the confession tearing from him. I did not go after Vale. I did not go to the law. I got on my horse, and I rode. I have been riding ever since. I became a drifter, a ghost. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect to be redeemed. He looked back at the fort. I have a debt. It is not to you. It is to them, to the dust, to the names I will never know. For one night, I need to be on the right side of the wall. I need to tear down what I built. He was finished. The air was empty. He had said it all. Mariah was silent for a long, long time. The wind moaned, a low, sad sound, over the ridge. He had given her every reason to put a bullet in his back and do this herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was not angry. It was not sympathetic. It was the voice of the desert itself, as old and as hard and as final as the stone they sat on. No one can trade for yesterday, she said. She let the words hang in the cold air. A judgment, an absolution. Both. But today, she continued, her voice so low he had to lean in to hear it. You get to choose. She reached down to her own boot. She pulled a knife. Not the warden's, not a big blade. A thin, mean, perfectly balanced knife with a black-wrapped hilt. She held it out to him. Hilt first. You lost this, she said. He stared at it. It was his, the knife that Pike had knocked from his hand at the ford, the one that had been lost to the mud. He had not seen her go back for it. In the chaos of the fight, in the water, she had seen it, and she had retrieved it. She had been carrying his own weapon, waiting. He took it. The handle was cold, but it fit his palm perfectly. Keep it sharp, she said, her eyes finding his in the dark. But not blind. A tool does not know what it cuts. A man must. The confession was over. The absolution was given. The partnership was sealed. Now, the work. Rowan picked up the piece of charcoal. He found a large, flat slab of sandstone at his feet. The air was different. It was clean. All right, he said, his voice hard. The surveyor returning. This is what I know. He began to draw on the stone, a large rectangle. The outer wall. It is 12 feet high, but the south side, here, the ground rises. It is only 9 feet. The rope is enough. He drew an X. The barracks. Another. The stables. The quartermaster's office. She said, "Here." He drew a small, attached square on the far side of the parade ground. "This is our problem. Deputy March. He is not a soldier. He is a clerk with a badge. But he is a nervous clerk. That office will be locked." Mariah looked at the crude map. "The door. Wood. Thick. But the lock is old." "No," Rowan said. A new thought. A memory. Hitting him. He scratched out the line for the door. "Not the front door. That is where the sentry passes." He drew a new, smaller line on the side of the building. "The adjutant's office. It connects. March uses it. I have been there before." The shame was in his voice, but he did not hide it. "It is where Vale used to meet him, to deliver payments, to avoid the eyes of the post commander." Mariah pointed at the new line. "A lock." "No lock," Rowan said, his voice certain. "Not for Vale. March would not dare. He will be in there, waiting for the sunrise, probably drinking. He will be waiting for Vale, or for Brody, to bring the final papers for the railroad. So we break it down. We do not have to," Rowan said. He tapped the stone with his finger, a new, cold energy in him. "I know the knock." She looked at him, her head tilted. He tapped the stone. 3 short, quick taps. He paused. Then 2 more. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. "That is the sound of Horace Vale's money," he said, his voice bitter. "He will open the door himself. He will be expecting us." Rowan looked at the map he had drawn, a map of his own guilt. "I used to knock on that door to get paid for a lie. Tonight, I am using it to settle the account." Mariah nodded. A single, sharp motion. She stood, the rifle coming up, one with her body. "Let's go choose." They doused the last of the embers. The world plunged into absolute, moonless dark. 2 shadows separated from the greater shadow of the ridge and began to move, silent as the dust, toward the wall. The fort wall was cold, rough-hewn stone, sharp against Rowan's palms. It smelled of alkali and cold, dead of night air. He'd thrown the weighted rope on his first try, the hook biting deep and silent into the packed earth of the rampart. 9 feet. Not a climb, barely a drop. Mariah was a shadow, a breath. She took the rope, tested it, and went up. She did not use his knots. She climbed hand over hand, her feet walking up the stone, a flow of pure, silent motion. She went over the top, not as a person, but as a wisp of smoke, disappearing into the black. Rowan followed. He was heavier, less graceful, his boots scraping, the sounds seeming to echo like gunshots in his own ears. He swung his leg over the top and dropped, landing in a crouch on the hard-packed parade ground. The air inside the walls was dead, still, thick with the smell of horse manure, cheap whiskey, and oiled leather. They were in. Mariah was already gone, a deeper shadow merging with the darker shadow of the quartermaster's building. Her job was the office. His was the diversion. He moved, keeping to the edge of the parade ground, a ghost in the vast, empty space. He saw the sentry. 1 man, his back to them, pacing the far wall by the main gate, his collar up, his rifle on his shoulder. Too far away to matter. Rowan's target was the stables. He reached the long, low building, the warm, rich scent of hay and horses rolling out to meet him. He saw the patrol, 2 soldiers, not by the sally port, but here, sharing a smoke by the stable door. Their voices low, grumbling. This was wrong. They were supposed to be walking. "Heard Brody is back in town," one of them said, his voice a low rasp. "Came in like a storm, looking for the deputy." "Brody gives me the creeps." The other one said, "But the madam, Levesque, she was in here not an hour ago. Went right to see March. Something is afoot." "Madame Levesque, here." Rowan's blood went cold. He backed away. He had to pull them. He had to pull them now. He moved along the picket line in the dark. His hand found a tether, a thick hemp rope. He did not untie it. He used his knife, the one she had returned to him. He sawed, quick and silent, leaving just a few strands. He slapped the horse, a big cavalry gray, hard on the rump. The horse, startled, yanked. The rope snapped. With a clatter of hooves on stone and a high-pitched, terrified whinny, the horse bolted, galloping loose across the parade ground. "Horse is loose!" the first soldier yelled, dropping his smoke. "Damn it all, go head it off!" The two soldiers, cursing, took off at a run, not toward the sally port, not toward the office, but away, chasing the clattering sound into the darkness. The diversion had worked. Rowan ran, doubling back, toward the quartermaster's office. He reached the corner, behind a stack of water barrels, just as a new terror seized him. The adjutant's door, the one he was supposed to knock on, was dark. But the front door of the quartermaster's office, the one facing the parade ground, suddenly opened, spilling a rectangle of yellow, smoky lamplight onto the ground. "He is not in the cellar," a reedy, panicked voice snapped. It was Evan March. He was not waiting inside. He was out on the steps, flanked by two soldiers, the same two who were supposed to be on patrol. Madame Levesque was clear, March fretted, wringing his hands. A woman, an Apache, and a drifter with slate-gray eyes. She said they were coming tonight, that Brody was tracking them. Find them before Brody gets here and skins me for letting them slip by. The trap had been sprung, but not on them. On March, Levesque had sold them all out. Rowan was trapped. Maria, he knew, must be frozen in the dark by the adjutant's door, 10 yards away. "Check the stores!" March shrieked. "Check the cellar! They have to be here!" The two soldiers, looking bored, started to move. One of them headed for the heavy wooden hatch set in the ground, the one that led to the post's wine and root cellar. Rowan saw his chance. It was a stupid one. It was the only one. He picked up a loose stone, the size of his fist. As the soldier reached for the iron ring on the hatch, Rowan threw the stone. He hurled it with all his strength, not at the men, but at the heavy, oaken door of the office, just past March's head. The stone hit with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot. "There!" March screamed, diving back inside his office. "In the stores! They are in the stores!" The two soldiers, startled, spun around, their rifles coming up. "No, you fools!" Rowan hissed from the darkness. "In the cellar, I saw them! In the cellar!" In the chaos, in the dark, one shadow's command was as good as another. The soldiers, desperate for a target, changed direction. "In the cellar," one of them yelled. They charged the hatch, ripped it open, and plunged into the black square, expecting to find their quarry. Rowan was moving before they were halfway down the steps. He bolted from behind the barrels, covering the 10 yards in 3 strides. He grabbed the heavy hatch and slammed it down. A muffled cry of surprise came from below. He dropped the thick iron bar, seating it in its brackets with a heavy, final thunk. He heard March, inside, pounding on the locked cellar hatch. "What is it? What do you see? Answer me." Rowan did not wait. He rounded the corner to the adjutant's door. It was open. She had used the chaos. He slipped inside. The room was black, but not silent. He heard it. A faint, metallic scratch. A click. A sharp, violent crack of breaking metal. He moved toward the sound. Moonlight from the single high window showed him the main office. March was still in the front, screaming into the cellar. And on the floor, in the dark, under the massive map table, was Maria. She was in front of the small, black, private safe. The door was open. She was not looking at him. She was looking at what she held in her hand. It was the scepter of the turquoise. It was not grand. It was a simple, polished piece of ironwood, capped with a single, massive, uncut stone of pure, deep turquoise. Even in the dim, gray moonlight, the stone seemed to drink the light, to glow from within. A cold, sleeping fire. It looked like a piece of the sky had fallen and been caught in her hand. Her other hand was in the safe. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. She opened it. The alarm bell began to ring. A slow, then frantic clang, clang, clang from the main gate. The locked-in soldiers were pounding. their gun butts booming against the hatch. Rowan crossed the room. "We have to go." She did not look up. She was staring at the last page of the book. It was a map, his map, and below it, a signature, a crudely drawn raven, a remelted, broken wax seal. "He faked my father's mark," she whispered, her voice a low, burning thing, a sound of such profound, cold rage that it made Rowan's skin crawl. Crash. The glass of the high transom window over the front door exploded. A gunshot. Not from inside, from outside. Rowan looked. Framed in the shattered doorway, on the parade ground, was Quinn Brody, his silk vest immaculate, his pistol smoking. He had been waiting. "There you are, Queenie." Brody smiled and raised his pistol for a second. More careful shot. The bullet tore the air where Rowan was standing. He had no time to move, no time to think. Maria moved. She did not flinch. She did not duck. She lunged. She grabbed the front of Rowan's shirt, her fist twisting, and pulled. It was not a lover's embrace. It was the absolute, commanding force of a wave. She pulled him down, hard, behind the solid oak of the map table. A second shot tore through the space where his chest had just been. The bullet thwacked into the far wall, kicking up plaster. Rowan felt a line of pure, searing heat. The bullet had torn the sleeve of his shirt, grazing the skin of his arm, leaving a shallow, bloody line. They were on the floor, dust and broken glass raining down. "The drain!" Rowan yelled, grabbing the ledger from her hand. "The one I showed you!" He crawled, dragging her with him. Brody was firing, his bullets chewing the heavy oak of the table. Thwack! 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 Rowan reached the grate in the corner. He ripped it open, a black hole. A wave of cold, damp air hit them, smelling of rust, old stone, and the faint, sweet scent of wild, wet flowers. They dropped into the darkness, into the running water below. They fell, splashing into 2 feet of icy, fast-moving water. Behind them, they heard Brody's heavy boots hit the office floor. "Get them! They are in the drains!" "Run!" Rowan yelled. They ran, stumbling, falling, in the pitch-black, narrow tunnel. The water was fast, pulling at their legs. Behind them, a splash, a curse, the clang of boots on an iron rung. Someone was following. They ran until their lungs burned. They burst out of the culvert a half-mile from the fort, collapsing onto a muddy bank, gasping, covered in slime. Their mules were gone, but their horses, the good ones they had stolen from Brody's camp, were still tethered in the grove of cottonwoods at the edge of the Slatewater rail yard. And then they heard it, in the graying, pre-dawn light, a sound that chilled Rowan to the bone, a long, mournful, 2-tone woo-oot. A plume of black smoke and white steam rose against the pale sky. The sunrise train, the train carrying Horace Vale's honored guests. It was pulling into the station. "We are late," Rowan panted, ripping a piece of his shirt to tie around his bleeding arm. "We have to ride. We can cut them off at—" "No." Maria was on her feet. She was covered in mud and filth. Her hair was a matted tangle, but she was standing straight, her back to him, facing the lights of the station. She held the scepter in her left hand, the ledger in her right. "We do not run," she said. Her voice was not the whisper from the office. It was the voice from the cage, the voice from the river. "They are coming to sign a paper. They are coming to buy our ghosts. We will be there. We will show them exactly what they are buying." She turned, and her eyes found his in the dim light. "We will show them in the light, in front of everyone, in Santa Viridian." Rowan looked at her, at this woman, covered in mud, armed with a stick and a book, ready to walk into the teeth of Quinn Brody and Horace Vale. He saw the scepter. He saw the ledger. But they were not the source of her power. He looked at her face, set like stone, and her eyes, burning with a fire for her people, for her land. He realized, in that moment, that a queen does not need a crown of gold. She just needs a voice that does not know how to bow. Santa Viridian at high noon was a stage set for a hanging. The heat was a white, blinding sheet. The dust, thick as flour, did not move, just baked in the air, tasting of lime and old iron. The town was a plaza with three choices. On the left, the double doors of Madame Levesque's saloon were thrown open, a dark, cool rectangle promising whiskey and lies. On the right, the high, narrow door of the white-painted chapel, its cross casting a sharp, unforgiving shadow. And at the far end, the train station, its new timber smelling of resin, a raw scar connecting this place to the outside world. On the porch of the saloon, Horace Vale was holding court. He was flanked by three men in expensive Eastern suits, the railroad men from the train. They were laughing, holding glasses of champagne, celebrating a deal already done. Then, the celebration stopped. Rowan and Maria rode into the plaza. They did not ride fast. They did not come in shooting. They rode at a walk, their horses kicking up small, lazy puffs of dust. They were covered in mud from the drainage ditch and streaked with sweat. Rowan's arm was bound in a bloody, makeshift bandage. Maria, her hair a wild tangle, her face a mask of dried mud and pure, cold fury, held the scepter of the turquoise across her lap. The laughter on the saloon porch died. The glasses stopped halfway to waiting mouths. A townsperson, carrying a bucket, froze. A dog, sleeping in the shade of the trough, lifted its head and was silent. The entire plaza held its breath. Horace Vale's face went from ruddy to pale. He set his glass down. "Quinn," he said, his voice low, from the shadows of the saloon. Quinn Brody stepped out, wiping his mouth, his smile in place. Maria did not look at him. She did not look at Vale. She rode to the exact center of the plaza, to the small, raised boot-black stand. A simple wooden chair on a 2-foot platform. She dismounted. She walked to the stand, her moccasins silent in the dust. She stepped up onto the platform. She was not tall, but from that small height, she commanded the entire plaza. She held the scepter. She raised it high for all to see, the blue stone drinking the white, hot light of noon. Then she brought it down, the ironwood butt striking the wooden platform with a single, sharp, solid thud. The sound was not loud, but it was the sound of an axe biting into a tree. It was the sound of a gavel. It was a declaration. The plaza, which had been silent, became something else. It became a courtroom. Rowan dismounted. He walked to stand at the base of the platform, the recovered, mud-stained ledger in his hand. He was no longer her prisoner. He was her witness. He opened the book. "This is the land ledger of the Chokonen people." Rowan's voice rang out, clear and steady, the voice of a man who reads measurements for a living. It bears the mark of Horace Vale, and the forged mark of a dead chief. He began to read. He read the false survey lines. He read the coordinates for the aquifer he himself had mapped. He read the dates, and he read the lies. "This is a lie," a voice shrieked. It was Evan March. He had come running from the marshal's office, his badge pinned crooked on his cheap vest. He was flanked by 2 hired guns, not soldiers now, just rough men from the saloon. "This is a disturbance of the peace. A public nuisance. I am arresting this woman for inciting a—" He put his hand on the butt of his pistol. He moved toward the stand. "She has not finished, Deputy." The voice was quiet, but it carried. It was Elias, the preacher, a thin old man in a threadbare black coat, who had stepped out of the chapel. He was standing between March and the boot-black stand. "This is not a disturbance," another man said, his voice a low rumble. The town blacksmith, a man with arms as thick as wagon axles, moved from his shop to stand beside the preacher. "This is a reading. Let the man finish the book." The crowd, which had been a collection of stunned individuals, began to flow together, drawn by the drama, forming a thick crescent moon shape around the stand. "This is preposterous." Horace Vale finally found his voice. He strode from the porch, his face purple, the railroad men following him, looking uneasy. This is barbarism standing in the way of progress. This railroad," he gestured to the suits, "is the future. It brings jobs. It brings civilization. We are building a new world here, and we cannot—" We will not be held back by the superstitions of a bygone age. He was a good speaker. The crowd, many of whom owed their jobs to his freight company, murmured. They shifted. They looked at their feet. Then Maria spoke. Her voice was not loud like Vale's. It was not a speech. It was a statement. He speaks of civilization, she said, her voice cutting through the heat. His progress, his future. She reached into her belt and pulled out a small, rolled piece of deerskin. She unrolled it. It was old, brittle, and marked with charcoal. This is the map of the true springs. This, she pointed not at the scepter, but at the sky, at the sun, is our calendar. My people know the water. We know the moon. We know the earth. We know that the water does not come when a man with a piece of paper says it should. It comes when the land is ready. She turned her gaze on Vale, and the entire plaza felt the heat of it. His progress is a stick of dynamite. His future is a dry spring. His civilization is a forged signature. He did not ask. He stole. Now, you tell me. Her voice rose, sweeping over the crowd. Who here is the savage? Who here truly knows the water? The crowd was split. They looked from the confident, angry white man in the suit to the mud-caked woman holding the stick. All eyes turned to the one person who stood between both worlds. On the porch of her saloon, Madame Levesque had not moved. She held an unlit cigarette in her hand. Vale saw the shift. He locked eyes with her. His face was a silent, brutal command. Remember who owns this town? Remember who signs your license? Levesque looked at Vale. She looked at Maria, at the scepter. She looked at the crowd, her customers, the men who paid her rent. She had spent a lifetime reading men, reading bluffs, knowing when to hold and when to fold. She took a long, slow breath. She was choosing. He is right, she said, her voice clear. A look of triumph flashed across Vale's face. A man has to protect his business, Levesque continued, taking a step forward. He has to look to the future. She looked at Rowan. And I did tell the deputy they were coming. I sold them out. For a price. Rowan's blood went cold. But, she said, and her gaze turned to Horace Vale like a knife. A woman also has to be able to sleep at night. And I find I cannot sleep. Mr. Vale, when I am being lied to, and when I am being bribed. She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A letter. This, she said, is a letter from Mr. Vale, delivered to me this morning, offering me $500 in gold, and a partnership in the new hotel, if I would misremember any conversations I may have overheard in my own bar, if I would testify that she pointed at Maria, was a liar. The crowd gasped. It was a single, sharp intake of breath. I am a lot of things, Madame Levesque said, but I am not a liar for hire. And I did hear him tell Deputy March to bury the ledger, and that the railroad men would be none the wiser. That was the breaking point. She is telling the truth, a man yelled from the back. It was the water hauler, a man whose skin was cured leather. My barrels have been empty ever since Vale's men put those red markers up at the dry wash. I told you all he said it was a drought. It was not a drought. It was him. The crowd, which had been a collection of murmurs, became a single, low, angry growl. It began to surge, not in a panic, but in a tight, angry press, turning from the platform, turning toward Vale. They turned, too, on Evan March. What about it? Deputy, the blacksmith roared, his voice like a hammer on an anvil. Whose badge are you wearing, his or ours? Evan March looked at the angry faces. He looked at Horace Vale, who was staring, aghast. He looked at the railroad men, who were backing away, their faces pale. He looked at Quinn Brody, who was just smiling, enjoying the show. March saw his world, his small, petty kingdom of bribes and authority, evaporating in the noon sun. His hand fumbled at his chest. He was shaking. He did not unpin the badge. He ripped it, the cloth of his vest tearing. He whispered. It is not. He threw the badge. It spun, a tin star, and landed in the dust. "It is not my jail," he said, his voice a broken thing. He fumbled at his belt, pulled off the heavy iron ring of keys, and threw them. They skidded across the dust and came to rest at the blacksmith's feet. A crack. A fissure. The wall of the old power had broken. "No!" Vale screamed, his voice cracking. "You cannot—" But Quinn Brody had seen enough. This was not his fight. This was a clean-up. Hiss. He had lit a smoke pot, a military trick. He threw it. It landed at the base of the bootblack stand. Thick, acrid. Yellow smoke exploded outward, instantly shrouding the center of the plaza in a choking, blinding fog. People screamed. They choked. The order of the courtroom was gone. It was a mob, a panic. In the smoke, Rowan felt a vicious, stabbing pain in his side. A pistol butt. He doubled over, gasping. He felt the ledger being ripped from his hand. He lunged. He saw a shadow. Brody's smiling shadow, disappearing into the chaos. The ledger was gone. "Rowan!" It was Mariah's voice. He looked up. She was on her mule, which she had pulled from the panic. She was holding the reins of his horse. The scepter was a line of defiance in her hand. She was not looking at the crowd. She was pointing, not east, not west, up, to the high, jagged spine of rock that overlooked the town from the south. A fortress of stone. Coyote Needle Ridge, the last high ground. Rowan scrambled for his horse. The smoke was already thinning, revealing the chaos. The plaza was a mess of running people and overturned carts. He saw the old preacher. Elias, the one who had stood for them. He had been knocked down in the surge. He was trying to stand, but his ankle was twisted, useless. Rowan turned back. He grabbed the old man by the collar, hauling him up, and with a grunt, threw him bodily over the saddle of his horse. "Hold on, old man!" He mounted, scrambling up behind the preacher, his arms around the old man, grabbing the reins. He looked at Mariah. She was watching. Her face was set, hard as the stone ridge she was pointing to. But as she saw him, saw what he had done, her eyes changed. Not softened. They did not soften. But they recognized. Half a degree. A flicker. An acknowledgement. "I see you." The chapel bell, its rope grabbed by a panicked hand, began to ring. A wild, discordant clang, clang, clang. From the station, the train whistle blew. A long, impatient, angry shriek. The two sounds, the bell and the whistle, the past and the future, clashed in the smoky air. The town, stunned, held its breath. Rowan spurred his horse. Mariah was already moving. They charged, not running from Santa Veridian, but running through it, toward the last fight. Coyote Needle Ridge was not a fortress. It was a grave marker. It was a spine of raw, red rock, 200 feet high, set against the sky like the broken teeth of a saw. The wind, which had been a whisper in the plaza, was a full-blown, shrieking flute up here, a hollow, mournful sound that never stopped. It ripped at their clothes and filled the air with a constant, high-speed mist of dust, a dry smoke that choked the lungs and stung the eyes. Down below, the plaza of Santa Veridian was a silent, empty square. The railroad men were gone, their train a faint black line of smoke on the eastern horizon. But Horace Vale was not. His camp was at the mouth of the narrow trail that led up the ridge. It was not a military camp. It was an angry, chaotic cluster of hired guns. Men pulled from the saloons and gambling dens, their faces grim. Quinn Brody, his shoulder wrapped in a new, white bandage, was directing them, his smile gone, replaced by a cold, efficient fury. "He will pull the cannon," Rowan said. He was lying flat on his belly at the edge of the ridge, his hat pulled low, using a spyglass he'd taken from Fort Barrow. "From the rail yard, there is a small field piece for guarding the payroll. He will have it here in 2 hours. He will shell us from the plane. We cannot hold this. We will not hold," Mariah said. Her voice was calm, almost quiet, yet it cut through the constant shriek of the wind. She was not looking at the camp. She was assessing her own forces. They were not many. The blacksmith and the water hauler, who had followed them. their faces set with a grim, new purpose. The old preacher, Elias, his ankle now tightly bound, his face pale but his eyes burning. And from the high rocks, slipping in like ghosts, a dozen of her own people, men and women, armed not with army rifles, but with bows and old, heavy Winchesters. Mariah began to give orders. She spoke in her own language, a series of short, quiet, liquid commands. Her people split. The bowmen, 3 of them, faded back, moving along the high spine to the south flank, becoming invisible shadows among the red rocks. The riflemen, her own and the townsfolk. She placed 50 yards back from the main pass, in a natural V-shaped trench of stone. "You do not fire to kill," she said, switching to English, her voice for all of them. "You fire for the horses. You stop the charge. You keep our way out clear." Then she turned to Rowan. "You," she said. "You read the earth. You know the rock." She pointed to the narrow, switchback trail that was their only way up. "I do not want them stopped. I want them broken. You are the surveyor. Survey this." Rowan looked. He saw the pass. And above it, a massive, 30-foot-high overhang of loose scree and balanced, fractured boulders. A widowmaker waiting for a push. "I need a rope," he said. And the blacksmith. He went to work. He did not give orders. He just worked. He and the blacksmith, with hands as strong as iron, maneuvered the largest, most unstable boulder into place. A keystone. They tied the rope, securing it to a stable horn of rock, leaving just enough slack to be cut with a single blow of an axe. Mariah watched them. She watched the whole field, and as the men below began to move, as the first wave of hired guns started up the trail, she gave her last order. It was for Rowan, for the blacksmith, for all of them. No man is shot who drops his gun. She said it was an absolute, no man is harmed who surrenders. We are not them. We do not make ghosts. We save our lives for the next day. Elias, the preacher, heard it, and he nodded once, a look of profound, pained respect on his face. The attack came. Brody, impatient, sent 8 men up the narrow pass. They were not walking. They were running. A low, desperate scramble, their faces turned down, their rifles held high. Rowan was at the keystone, his hand on the rope, the blacksmith's axe in his other hand. He did not look at the men. He looked at the leader, a big man in a red shirt. He waited until the red shirt was directly under the overhang. He waited until the pass was full, a compressed, panicked line of running men. "Now," he said. He did not cut the rope. He struck the rock horn. The axe bit deep. The rope snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. For a single, terrible second, nothing happened. Then, with a low, deep groan that seemed to come from the mountain itself, the keystone boulder shifted, it tilted, and it fell. It was not a slide. It was an avalanche, a 30-foot wall of rock, scree and red, choking dust simply detached. It did not fall on the men. It fell in front of them, and behind them. It was a roar that drowned the wind. It was a wave of stone that broke in the pass, cutting the 8 men off from the world. The attack was shattered. The pass was gone. From the dust cloud below, a man screamed. A shot rang out, but it was not aimed up. Rowan looked, down at the base, where Vale's men were scrambling back. A small, brass field cannon was being wheeled into place, pulled by a sweating, panicked mule, and then Evan March, the disgraced deputy, stepped out from behind a wagon. He had a rifle in his hand. He had been hiding. "No more," he screamed, his voice thin and cracking. "You will not with that." He was not aiming at Vale. He was not aiming at Brody. He fired. The shot was true. The bullet, from 100 yards, struck the heavy wooden spokes of the cannon's right wheel. The wheel, its integrity gone, cracked and then splintered, collapsing. The cannon barrel tipped, useless, into the dirt. Traitor. Horace Vale shrieked. A half-dozen guns turned on March. He did not run. He just stood there, his rifle empty, and took the volley. He was thrown backward, a broken puppet. and was still. The battle had been won, but the fight was not over. From the side, from a place Rowan had not seen, a shadow detached itself. Quinn Brody. He had not been in the pass. He had been climbing the flank. He was covered in dust, his good vest torn, and he had a knife in his hand. He was coming for Rowan. "Rowan!" Elias screamed. Rowan turned. He had no time to draw. He brought the axe up, but Brody was inside. Too fast. Brody's knife flashed. A line of silver. Rowan felt a fire, a deep, searing line of pain open up on his left shoulder. He did not fall back. He roared, a sound of pain and fury, and drove forward. He dropped the axe and grabbed Brody's wrist, the knife hand. He brought his own knife, the one from the river, up from his belt. It was not a duel. It was a brawl. A dusty, desperate, grunting fight. They fell, rolling, their arms locked, dust filling their mouths, their lungs. Brody was stronger, but Rowan was fueled by a debt. He twisted, using Brody's own weight, and they rolled, over and over, until they came to rest in a cloud of dust. Rowan was on top. His shoulder was a sheet of fire. Brody's knife was still in his hand, but his wrist was pinned. Rowan had his own knife, its point resting just below Brody's ribs. He could end it. One push. He looked into Brody's eyes. They were wide, feral, and still, smiling. Rowan did not push. He pressed, just enough. The smile on Brody's face wavered as he felt the cold, sharp point. Rowan raised his hand, not with the knife. He balled his fist, and he hit Quinn Brody. Once, a solid, crunching blow to the jaw. The gunman's head snapped back. He went limp. He was not dead. He was not even unconscious. He just stopped. The fight was gone. He lay on his back, breathing hard, his hand opening, the knife falling from his fingers. He just lay there, blinking, looking up at the vast, empty blue sky as if he had never, in his entire life, truly seen it before. "It is over! Vale!" Rowan yelled, getting to his feet, his arm screaming, blood soaking his sleeve. "It is never over, Horace Vale." He was frantic. His men were broken. His cannon was broken. His best gun was down. He looked at the ledger in his hand, the one he had stolen. It was worthless without the scepter. He looked up. Maria, she was on the highest point, the needle itself, a single 20-foot pillar of stone. She was watching him. The scepter was in her hand. "That is mine," Vale screamed. He was a man possessed. He started to climb. Not the pass. He was climbing a different pinnacle, a treacherous, narrow spire of loose rock, the one Rowan recognized, the one with his old, forgotten survey marker at the top. "You want it!" Vale shrieked, scrambling, his fine boots slipping. "You want your magic. I will take it. I will break it. It belongs to me. The land belongs to me." He reached the top. He was 10 feet from her, on a separate pillar. He was panting, his face purple, the ledger still clutched in his hand. Maria did not raise her rifle. She did not move. She just stood there, the scepter in her hand, the wind ripping at her hair. She was the mountain. She was the land. "This does not belong to you," she said, and her voice carried a clear, clean judgment over the wind. "You cannot steal the sky. You cannot sign a paper for the earth." She said it for him, but she also said it for the town, for the blacksmith, for the preacher, for her own people, who were all watching, silent, from the ridge below. "Lies!" Vale screamed. He lunged. He tried to jump the gap, to tackle her, to get his hands on the scepter. His boot, his expensive, fine-tooled leather boot, came down. It landed hard on the rotted, half-driven, red-painted wooden survey stake. His stake, the one he had ordered Rowan to place, the marker of his lie. The rock around it, already fractured, gave way. Vale did not fall from the cliff. He did not scream. He just stumbled. The ground he thought was solid, the ground he had claimed, betrayed him. He slipped, his arms windmilling. The coil of rope he still carried from his climb tangled around his legs. A perfect, greedy knot. He fell, not into the void, but hard, onto a lower, narrow ledge. He landed with a sickening, wet crack. He was alive. He was conscious. But he was screaming. A new sound. A sound of pure, shattered pain. His leg was at an angle that was not human. He was pinned. His own rope. His own stake. His own lie. Holding him fast. He had not been defeated. He had defeated himself. Silence. The wind howled, as if in triumph. The hired guns below, their leader trapped, their enforcer beaten, looked at each other. One by one, they set their rifles down in the dust. Maratya turned. She came down from the pinnacle. She walked, not like a victor, but like a woman with work to do. She walked past the bowman, past the preacher, past the bound and silent form of Sutter Pike, who had been found and brought up. She walked to Rowan. He was sitting, leaning against a rock, his face pale, his arm a mess of torn cloth and dark, flowing blood. She stood over him. She looked at his shoulder. Her face was impossible to read. It was stone. Then she knelt. She put her hand, her small, warm, strong hand, not on the wound, but flat against his chest, over his heart, just as she had in the cave. She felt it, the steady, thudding beat. Then she moved her other hand, pressing it, hard, against the bleeding gash on his shoulder. It was not a caress. It was a command for the bleeding to stop. Her eyes met his. They were dark, full of the wind and the rock. They were the eyes of a queen. But for a fraction of a second, the stone cracked, and he saw the woman. He saw the flicker, not of softness, of worry. "You still owe me a day's work," she said, her voice a low rasp. Rowan looked up at her. He tried to smile. It came out as a grimace. Blood, or maybe it was sweat, was in his eyes. "I have a lifetime," he whispered, half in jest, half in truth. The dawn that broke over the red comet wash was not a dawn. It was a conflagration. The sky was not painted in soft pastels. It was a violent, celebratory scar of pure, liquid fire. Reds and deep, burning oranges flooded the eastern sky, so bright it hurt the eyes, making the black, hard lines of the mesas look like charcoal sketches. This was the edge of her land. This was the line he could not cross. Below the ridge, in the wide, sandy basin of the wash, a new kind of order was being born. It was not a court. It was a council. Horace Vale sat on the ground, his hands tied, his face a mask of gray, sweat-soaked dust. His leg, crudely splinted by the blacksmith, was a monument to his arrogance. He was a broken man. In every way a man can be broken. Quinn Brody and Sutter Pike sat near him, their wrists also bound, their faces empty. They were no longer hunters. They were just cargo. The community, the one forged in the plaza, was in session. The blacksmith, his face grim, was using his own hammer to pull the last of Vale's red survey stakes from the earth near the springs. He threw each one onto a fire, where they burned with a greasy, black smoke. The water hauler was already at the spring, which had begun to trickle again, and he was filling his barrels, his face a study of pure, quiet joy. Madame Levesque had, as promised, brought coffee, a pot of it, strong and black. She had also brought a new, clean ledger, the one from her own saloon, and a pot of ink. She sat on an overturned crate, the new book open on her knee. "All right, preacher," she said, her voice all business. "Let us write it down. The truth. This time, I will write, you speak, and you." She pointed at the blacksmith. "You are the witness." They were taking the testimony. They were recording the confession of Sutter Pike. They were writing down the story of Evan March, of his corruption, and of his one, final, impossible act of defiance. They were building a new map, one made of words and truth, to replace the one made of lies. Rowan stood apart from it all, by his horse. His left shoulder was a universe of dull, throbbing pain. Maria had cleaned and stitched the knife wound with a grim, practiced efficiency before the sun had risen, using a needle and a thread of sinew. His arm was bound tightly to his chest. He was a one-armed man, and his place was not here. He checked the cinch on his saddle for the third time, his good hand clumsy. The silence was thick. It was the silence of a new morning, of a world that has been scoured clean and is waiting to begin again. He knew, with the certainty of a man reading a map, that his road led east, back to Slatewater, back to the world of paper and lines. A shadow fell over him, blocking the fire of the sunrise. It was her, Maria. She had come up on him, silent as the new day. She was clean. She had washed the mud and blood of 3 days from her skin in the small, returning trickle of the spring. Her black hair was damp, and she wore it loose. She was not the queen. She was not the prisoner. She was just the woman. He stopped fumbling with the saddle. He turned to face her. She looked at him, her dark eyes clear, unreadable. And yet he felt he could see everything in them. The cage, the canyon, the fire. "This is where I choose," she said, her voice quiet. Not meant for the council, just for him. She held the scepter of the turquoise in her hand. She looked at it, this piece of wood and stone that had cost so much blood. Then she turned. She walked the few paces to where the eldest of her people, an old man with a face like a dried apple, was sitting, watching the new ledger being written. She knelt. She said nothing. She just held out the scepter. The old man looked at it. He looked at her. He did not take it immediately. He raised his hand and, with a slow, trembling finger, he touched the broken half-bead of turquoise that still hung at her throat. A silent question. She nodded. She was not just returning the scepter. She was accepting her place. She was the one who had been broken and returned. He took the scepter from her. He placed its butt on the ground, and he leaned on it. A new, stronger staff for his old hands. The circle was complete. Maria stood. She walked back to Rowan. The air between them was still. The sun was on their faces. This was the end of the line. "Your arm," she said. "It will hold," he replied. "You are leaving." It was not a question. "I cannot stay." "I know." He had done what he came to do. He had paid his debt, or, at least, he had made the first payment. He looked at her face, which he now knew better than any map he had ever drawn. He saw the strength in her jaw, the small, scarred line on her brow, the way her eyes held the morning light. He did not plan it. He did not think. He just moved. He raised his one good hand, his right hand, and he placed it on her cheek, his calloused, dirty palm against her smooth, cool skin. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into it, just a fraction, her eyes closing for a single, brief second. He leaned in. She met him halfway. They kissed. It was not the desperate, searching kiss of the storm-filled alcove. It was not the kiss of passion or of hunger. It was a kiss of adults. It was a kiss of farewell. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was final. It was a kiss of gratitude. It was a kiss of profound and shared respect. He tasted the clean, cold water of the spring on her lips. His other hand, the one bound to his chest, he pressed against her side, feeling the steady, strong beat of her heart through her ribs. Her own hands came up, not to his chest, but to his back, holding him, anchoring him. One last time. It was a kiss that said everything they could not. "You are safe. You are seen. You are free. I will remember you." They broke apart, slowly. The air was colder now that they were separate. She kept her hand on his chest, where his heart was hammering. He kept his hand on her cheek. She rested her forehead against his. They stood like that, in the full, fiery light of the new day. Two people who had been to war and come back, but would not be coming back together. "Your work for me," she whispered, her breath warm against his face, "is done." She pulled back, just enough to look him in the eye. From here, Rowan called her, "You work for your own conscience." It was the greatest gift she could have given him. Not forgiveness, not a future, but a purpose. He let out a breath he had been holding for 2 years, a slow, painful, and cleansing smile touched his lips. "Yes, Mazam," he said. He corrected himself. "Yes, Mariah." He stepped back. He reached to his hip, to the colt that was tied with the new, clean cloth. He did not untie the pistol. He untied the cloth. He took the simple white band and, with his teeth in his one good hand, he tied it in a tight, permanent knot around his right wrist. It was not a sign of service to her. It was a reminder, a scar, a promise. He swung himself up into the saddle. It hurt, everything hurt, but it was a good, clean pain. He turned his horse's head east, toward Slatewater, toward 1,000 maps that were wrong, 1,000 lines that needed to be redrawn. Mariah stood and watched him. She did not move. She did not wave. She simply was a fixed point. He kicked the horse. He did not look back. The sound of his horse's hooves, a steady, rhythmic beat, grew softer, fading into the vast, open silence of the morning. Mariah turned, the scepter now with her people, the ledger with the town. She turned and walked, not to the council, but to the west, toward the deep, stone maze of the Red Comet wash, toward home. The sound of her moccasins was lost in the sound of the wind. On the horizon, the red streak of the fire dawn remained, a promise or a warning, a sign that if on some distant future day their roads should ever cross again, they would not need words. They would know each other, by the silence and by the wind. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and like this video. And if you enjoyed the journey, please support us by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.